This is going to be 8.3 looking at population ecology. When you watch 8.4, you'll notice that 8.3 and 8.4 really go together, looking at exponential and logistic growth curves. You maybe have done a little bit of this before, but we're going to be going into more detail in AP biology, specifically at spending time on the mathematical equations that go with each of these two words. So today I'll give you kind of the base background for them, and then when you come to class, you'll have time to actually practice the calculations and get going with that. When we are talking about a population, we're talking about individual organisms that are of the same species. A community includes two different types of species or multiple species living in a community with each other, but a population is only going to be the individuals of the same species. So in this picture, we have a population of elephants. It's also going to be a population in a particular given area. So keep that in mind as well when we're talking about a population. We know that individuals interact with one another and with the environment in complex ways. You're starting your project for AP biology looking at a species and how they behave in their environment, and we know they also might interact with each other. Individuals within a population will usually interbreed with one another more than interbreeding with individuals from another population. So if I took an elephant out of the zoo that came from a population that is not the same population as this one, or because the fact that they've been out of that population for a very long period of time, we'll see they're more likely to try to breed with each other first before they're going to breed with the one that was from captivity. And that's because they want to stay within their population and interbreed with one another. Many adaptations are going to be related to obtaining and using energy in a particular environment. So the size of that population is really going to depend on the resources that are available to them. And so when there's less food available, it makes sense the population size is going to be decreasing because there's less energy to support those individuals. We're going to see that reproduction is harder because they don't have the energy they need to do that. So reproduction is going to decrease. And we're also going to see that the offspring are going to have a hard time surviving. So they're also going to decrease because there's not food available to the offspring. On the other hand, when food is really readily available, there's lots of food out there, then the population size is actually going to increase. Reproduction is going to increase, more food for offspring, so the offspring are going to be able to survive. So that's going to increase. And so we're going to see that the population will increase when there's food available. Different species had or have adaptations that are going to aid in survival when the energy availability changes. And so some adaptations are already kind of helping with these things, knowing that the amount of energy may change. So, for example, there are species where they may store fat during the winter months to help with this. We might see that they lose leaves or they're growing leaves when the daylight changes based on availability, or even the migrating in response to changing of foods. They may migrate from one area to another area. Having enough energy is extremely important for populations. Population growth is going to depend on a number of factors involved. And that's how we're going to get to this equation in just a second. And I know the equation looks a little complex, but we'll break it down. There are really several factors that are going to affect if a population can grow in size. The first one is the age at reproductive maturity. If it takes a population a long time to reach reproductive maturity, their population is going to grow slower than if when that species is 6 months old, they're already able to have a baby. The number of offspring produced is also going to impact it. A species that has one baby every year is going to have a smaller population size than a species that's able to reproduce by having 15 offspring, and all 15 are going to survive, and they're able to do that every 2 months. That's going to make a much bigger population. Also, the frequency of when they reproduce, like I said, are they reproducing every 6 months or are they only able to reproduce once in their lifetime? And then there's survivorship of offsprings to reproductive maturity. So if a species can't reproduce until they're 13 years old, like a human, for example, or 14 or around there, if they don't survive to reach that age of maturity, then they're not able to have offspring. So keep that in mind as well. If reproductive maturity for an elephant, for example, is at, I don't know, 10 years old, then that elephant would have to reach 10 years old. And I made that example up, but you get the point of that. Population growth equation is going to include four factors: dn, which is the change in population size; dt, which is the change in time. So it's how the population changes in size over a period of time, is going to be equal to the birth rate minus the death rate. And that's what the big B and the big D stand for, is birth rate and death rate. And that will get you your population growth. How fast is your population growing? Your births minus your deaths. Exponential growth is really what we're talking about when we see a sharp increase in the growth of a population. And this is only going to occur under ideal conditions when those resources we were talking about are very abundant. It's when we have lots of energy available to that particular population. The number of organisms added in each generation increases as the population size gets larger. So we see that more individuals are reproducing, and how long it takes to reproduce or to produce an offspring is going to stay the same. We oftentimes say an exponential growth is really a J-shaped curve. And so you can see over here in this picture, this is where nothing's impacting this population in terms of stopping them from being able to grow. We're seeing lots of resources, and we just keep seeing an increase in our population. You should have seen exponential growth models in math class before with this J-shaped curve like this. With this again is not something we want to see in certain populations, because we know that this is just going to keep increasing and increasing and increasing like this. I want my money to do this. I don't want the human population to do this. That's not so good. Exponential growth is represented by an equation that looks like this. So again, similar letters that we saw before: dn, which is the change in population size; dt, which is the change in time. So again, this is the change in the population size over time, is equal to the population size n times R max, which is the maximum per capita growth rate of the population. And so R will be your growth rate, N will be your size of your population. When you multiply those two things together, you're going to get your change in your population over your change in time. And we'll look at this in class, how you can get R actually from this graph here. So a few key takeaway points is that populations comprise individuals of the same species. A community is going to have multiple species, and these populations are going to see the same species interacting with each other and with the environment. Population growth is going to depend on factors including birth rate, the amount of time, the death rate, and the population size. Reproduction with no constraints, meaning they have lots of food, there's nothing pushing on them in terms of the environment to stop them, is going to result in exponential growth of the population. And this can be dangerous. We do not want to see an exponential growth in every single type of species, or they're going to take over. And if they take over that entire species, that can really decrease diversity in a population. So it can also be a bad thing. Some people who work for the DNR, their job is actually to look at this. What is the prediction in the future of these populations changing, and how can we slow or change the rate in which a population is growing? That is it at looking at the exponential model. The next video will focus on the logistic growth curve